So tonight's webinar is going to be about the where of a plant record. So we'll talk quite a lot about grid references and mapping. And I've put a QR code there on the edge of my screen for those who use such things. You would be able to scan that with your phone. It will take you directly to the 100 Plants web pages on the BSBI website, where there's lots and lots of resources available to support the 100 Plants Challenge, many of which are obviously being covered in the webinars, but there are web pages and links and other resources there too. Of course, you can obviously go to the BSBI website without using the QR code, so don't feel obliged to. It's just for those who like to use that sort of thing. So my name is Chantal Helm, and I am BSBI's training coordinator, and I'll be delivering the webinar tonight. So a quick summary again for the beginning of the webinar. It's the 100 Plant Challenge, where we have been asking everybody who is new to plant ID potentially or new to recording to have a go at recording 100 plants in 2026. So we've been blown away by the number of people who are joining us, and I think we've reached over 2,000 people who've signed up, which is absolutely phenomenal. And we've had lots and lots of records which have been submitted to our iRecord activity. So we are using iRecord as a platform where records are being submitted. And if you haven't already signed up to the 100 Plants in 2026 challenge in iRecord, we would really encourage you to join everybody else. We've got 1,000 people signed up there so far. 729 of those have already submitted some records, which is wonderful. And you will then also see that there is a summary of the progress there so far. So you'll see there's a map, and all the blue dots is everybody's records. And then you will see that there are 15,678 records. I think that was as of yesterday. So you can have a look at that yourself if you've registered for the challenge on iRecord, and there is a link via that QR code again for you to have a look at. Okay, so that's just a quick summary there of the background to the actual project. But let's get into the plans for this evening. So we are going to I'm going to go over what was covered in a webinar back, webinar number 3, I think it was, where we spoke about what recording is. And we're going to focus on the elements of recording, particularly the where. We're going to talk about what parts of the where we need to have as part of our records. So we need a location and a georeference, and we'll discuss why we need those. We're going to talk about how to input that location information into iRecord. So either through the website or through an app. And I'm going to do a demo to do that. And then we're going to do a little bit of deep dive into the terminology associated with grid references at the end. For those who are interested in understanding grid reference a little bit more, I'm going to have a go at trying to explain how they work and what the different grid systems are in the different countries. So British and Irish grids and how they work. So that's the plan. So let's get into it. So we spoke about this before, the journey of a single record submission. So first of all, you'll obviously be out and about on your walk or maybe in a nature reserve or whatever, and you've spotted a plant. Maybe you already know what it is. You can identify it from sight, or you may need to use a few tools or guides to be able to identify that. We had a webinar going over all the different equipment and hints and tips of what you would need, the toolkit to help you identify the different plants. And then you would, regardless of whether you know the plant or not, you would want to photograph it. And we had a webinar as well, all about photographing plants. So do have a look back if you haven't watched any of those already. I do know that many of those who are joining us on these webinars every week have been following along from the beginning. So apologies if I'm saying things that you're already doing, but because these webinars are being recorded, they're up on YouTube, we're getting thousands of people watching them from all over the country. We're making sure that we cover all the bases in all the talks each time. So then once you've done the identifying and the photographing of your plant, you would then want to work out exactly where you are, where that plant is growing. And that's what we're talking about today. And finally, you would then submit the record to iRecord. So here's just a picture of a record that I submitted to iRecord a few days ago, maybe last week. And it's for Stadleria holostea, which is the greater stitchwort. You can see a picture of that as part of the record over there. So the four elements of a record, just to remind ourselves, and those who've been submitting records already will obviously be very familiar with these. The what, which is the correct identification, the where, the location of where the plant itself was seen, and the when, obviously the date, and the who, and that would be you if you were recording the plant. So that's all the four W's. Let's talk about where. Okay, so there's two parts to the where, the locality itself, and then the georeference. So let's talk about the locality first. So this could be anything, a place name. So we've got some examples there, Stonehenge. It could be a nature reserve. It could be a place, a village, a town, or even a street name within a particular village or within a sort of countryside area potentially, or lane. So the locality is relatively easy to work out for your record. You don't really need any technology. I suppose you just need to sort of know where you are. And it's pretty easy to remember. Disadvantages of locality as part of a record is that it could be variable in size. You're not really designating a particular unit of space or area. There's no precision. It could be anywhere within that sort of location. It could change over time. Place names could change. The same place site could be somewhere else entirely in a whole different part of England, Scotland, Wales, or Ireland. And it's very difficult to interpret the locality name digitally. Okay, so, and it also could mean different things to different people, depending on where you're from. The georeference part of the record is going to give you a standardized unit of area. So for example, that's that long number, that is a grid reference, TL, and then it's got 5 digits and then another 5 digits. So that's a 10-digit grid reference, which is a very high resolution grid reference, representing a 1 by 1 meter little square on the ground. Now, we don't really have access to technology that can accurately measure the 1 by 1 meter on the ground in our phones or on our own devices, but that is the highest resolution that we could go to at that level. So good things about the georeference, again, doesn't change over time. It's unique to a geographical position or area and very easy to interpret digitally. But unfortunately, it does require map skills to appreciate how the grid reference is formed. It can be easy to make mistakes with grid references if you're not quite familiar with how they work and how they're put together. However, in today's digital world, we're very lucky to have lots and lots of tools that can work out the grid reference for us. And of course, in our record, it does that for us, but it's still useful to understand what that number is meaning, that number and those letters is meaning, because you want to make sure that your grid reference is accurate for your plant. So hence why we're talking about that in a bit more detail today. Oops. Okay, so here we are. I'm looking at a map, and I'm really having a look at my plant. This is the greater stitchwort that I spotted the other day. You can see it as a purple dot on the map over here. And I've described the locality of that plant location as Rectory Lane. That's this lane. That's near Pink's farm, and the nearest town is Shenley. So now this one is a relatively difficult locality to describe because it's not simply in a town or in a nature reserve that I have a name for. I had to kind of describe it in a bit more detail. Oftentimes, if you're in a nature reserve like Trumpington Meadows, for example, you would just have to say Trumpington Meadows if that was some place that you were at. And maybe if that's in Cambridge or whatever the city may be for your nature reserve. And then I've got a grid reference, which I've listed here. And this is a 6-digit grid reference. So that makes up my location information, the where of my record. So here are some examples of good, bad, and ugly records, location information. So good ones, what we've spoken about, the Rectory Lane one, where you've got details of that, even though you're not in a easily defined location. The Trumpington Meadows, for example, if that's a nature reserve within Cambridge. And if you are in Trumpington Meadows, you could even define closer in terms of which part of Trumpington Meadows you may be if you know where that exactly is. And then some not so good parts of or examples of locations. the green next to the chemist shop. So that doesn't really give you lots of information to help with verification, because where is that, which town, what village? It's only local knowledge will know where that is. The lane near the burial ground. Again, it's a bit better, but it's not really giving you village name or anything else like that. So again, you're not going to know where that is. And then the last one is a bit of an odd one. You may think, well, that looks perfectly fine. You're saying Cherry Hinton, Cambridge, Cambridgeshire. That clearly defines where it is. The problem with this one is that, and we'll see when we demo putting things into iRecord again, is this is what was automatically generated by iRecord. And when you are using the app, for example, it can automatically generate a location based on your grid reference and the GPS of your phone. And it's very tempting to select that, but it does prevent us from checking and doing the independent checks between the grid reference and the location information. The main reason why we need both of them together. So if you're automatically selecting that, if your grid reference is wrong, then that is going to depend on your grid reference, and then both of those location pieces of data are going to be incorrect. So it's important to make sure that when you're putting in your record in iRecord, that you make sure you add in a specific location that isn't pre-selected or provided to you by the iRecord app. Okay, so let us go and have a look at a demo now of submitting a record to iRecord on the website. So what should be showing on the screen now is the iRecord website. So I've logged in, of course, under my name. And on the top here, I've gone to the activities, and because I'm also registered with 100 plants activity, then I have I opened that up, selected that there, and it's the top one on my activities. And to submit a record to that activity and making sure that it's part of that activity, I will use this little casual record button to submit a record to that activity. So let's click on that. I then will get my form to complete. And you can see it's saying it's going to be adding it to the challenge. I'll enter the date, of course. I'm not going to do everything here. I'm going to really focus down to the bit about the location, because there was already a webinar where we covered how to enter a record generally into iRecord. So back to location here. So you'll see under location, you've got 3 main boxes. So if I have a good idea of the place name, I could type that in. So let's do Trumpington Meadows. And I'll press search. It gives me a list of different things here, and I think I'm going to go to the country park. Okay, and then automatically the map will update to that location. Obviously, I need to check that this is where I think I am, where my plant is recorded. So I can zoom out, and I can zoom in, that will change. Now, there's a little plus button on the right-hand side here, where you can actually modify the type of map that you're using. So this is an OpenStreetMap. There's Ordnance Survey Map, which I like to use. And then you press the minus to get rid of that little blue box. So you'll see now that it is putting that location in that red dot. Now, if I move my cursor around, you'll see I'm getting a little box. And that little box will help me to define where my plant exactly was and at what resolution I want to record my record. So I can zoom in and be as accurate as possible in terms of where my record was. Now, once I zoom in a bit more, I can click on that extra section, and then what it should do is it then will zoom in and it'll show me an aerial shot, which makes it a bit easier to help you locate. So if you're walking along this pathway, for example, and I spotted the plant somewhere around here, maybe I'll move my little box over there. And then you'll see what it's doing is it automatically is finding the grid reference for you over here and putting it out. So this one's got a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-digit or 8-figure grid reference for you. So you can see that's quite high resolution. That's a 10 meter by 10 meter little square there. So that's not bad. If I zoom out, and you'll find that there's a little guide here at the bottom if you're wanting to change your resolution. So I need to press the minus button on my keyboard at the same time, and then it will, and I click into a box, it will change the resolution of my grid reference to this one, which is a 6-figure grid reference. can see there. So that is 100 meter by 100 meters square. You can see it's a much larger area, not very detailed, accurate, but maybe I couldn't remember exactly where the plant was there. It doesn't really matter. This whole sort of area is pretty much the same. Nobody's going to be too worried if I record a daisy there or there or whatever. If it actually was there, that's no problem at all. It was within this sort of 100 by 100 meter square. You can see the grid reference kind of appears here at the bottom as well, depending on where you're clicking on. Okay, so once you're happy with where your record is, you can click it, and then you just check that's okay. Then you need to enter the location information. So remember, this should be a nice, useful, detailed one. So I'm going to say trumping, meadows, oopsie, next to path or something like that. You can put whatever you want, but location is usually 20 meadows country park. And then you could put Cambridge. So just to clarify that it is definitely Cambridge, because there may be Trumpington Meadow Country Parks and other parts of the world. So there we go. And then that would be your locality information, your where for that record. So that is then submitting it via the website. There is also a little option here to do habitat, which is quite nice. You can click down and you could select a particular habitat. So that looks like it could be grassland that's relevant. And then there are little even finer scale points here to talk about what kind of grassland it might be. So it's probably one of those, a fertile grassland, including hay meadows. And then if you want to provide any more information about your location or anything else about your record, you could type something in the comment box as well. So that's entirely up to you. And then, of course, you press save, and then your record will be saved. Okay, so go back now. So that's the website. The next thing to show you will be, oopsie, the app. So let me get my app running. Okay, so you hope you can see that on the screen. I've got the app open on my phone. I'm sharing my phone. So let's have a look. So when you open the app, this is the home page. I have got some pending records on my home page. These ones I haven't yet submitted yet. But let's have a look at this top one, a draft one. So if you were to submit a record here, you'd use the plus button, and then you would say, okay, I would like to use take a photo of the plant. If you're in the field, you could do that. Or I could use a photo from a gallery. Maybe I took something nice before, or a selection of photos that were showing the key features of the plant. But because I've already created a record already, I've got it in draft there, I'm going into that now. So that should be showing up. I've identified it as Dove's Foot Cranesbill. The little green circle at the bottom of my photo is talking about the auto ID feature with an iRecord. It will give you suggestions, and if it's green, I think it is quite it's a bit of a higher level of confidence in its suggestion. So if you click on the photo, you can see some suggestions that can help you check whether you maybe are agreeing, or it's agreeing with your assessment of the species ID based on the photograph. Okay, so let's look at location. So if I go into location, I will have a map. At the top, I will have the grid reference, and then I will have the location information. So you'll see I've already input Trumpington Meadows, Cambridge there. And I can use the map now, scrolling with my fingers in or out to have a look where I remember the exact location for my plant record. So here's that path again. I can really zoom in as much as I want to exactly next to that path and by that tree, for example. And then you can see that the grid reference will update. It's giving me an 8-figure grid reference at the top there. As I said earlier, be very careful that when you do this and you get a grid reference, if you haven't put in a location name down there, iRecord will suggest something to you. And just be careful with what you select there, because it's much better to type in the location name based on where you want to describe that location as, rather than accept an offered suggestion from the app. Because remember, we want to make sure that the grid reference is separate from the actual location information. They're independently added. Because if your grid reference is incorrect, then if you're using the feature in the iRecord app to suggest a location, then they're not independent, and that can make problems for the record later on. Okay, so it's just a double check that everything is accurate. So that's why we have both parts. Okay, and then there is my location information, and it appears there under location. You can see. And then, of course, you can fill in the rest of your information for your record and then select finish. And I can see in the top there, top right corner, that this is going directly into the 100 plants challenge. So if you are in your app, usually just make a check that you've selected the 100 plants challenge activity when you're selecting your plant, when you're recording plants, ideally. Okay, so that was just a broadly overview of the recording and how you get those records in with the demo. So hopefully that has provided some more detail. Most of you are probably getting that 100% already and no problems, but maybe there were a few little hints and tips there that you hadn't spotted in terms of the features on both of the apps or the website. Now, let's get into a bit more of the technicalities of grid references and the terminology associated with them. And this is quite relevant to recording in general, biological recording in general. So this will provide some context, hopefully, for some of these terms and things that pop up, exactly where they come from. Okay, so here we're starting with a bit of a big table with lots of numbers and things on there, but it's a summary table. I will come back to it again at the end. It's showing you some of the main spatial recording units that you will encounter whenever you're seeing plant recording or even any other species recording out there. And sort of the highest, or the lowest resolution recording for many species will be at hectare level, and that would be a 10 by 10 kilometer square. And if you know the Ordnance Survey maps, you will know that you have got some of the maps, and they've got the Land Ranger series and the Explorer maps. I think the Land Ranger is 1 in 50,000, but the hectare is 1 in 250,000. So that's its scale. And if you were to look at a grid reference at hectare level, it would be a 2-figure grid reference. We'll explain that now in much more detail, how we get to that and what it means. But hectares are used for national distribution maps. So when you look at an atlas map like this, which shows the distribution of a species of plant, and you see all these little dots, they're representing probably, I think these are tetrads on this one, but they could be hectares, 100 by 100 meter squares, if you were to go to the Atlas website. So that would be the broad level at which you are mapping. You can also map at tetrad level, which is a 2 by 2 kilometer mapping point, and that would be TQ41K as an example of what a tetrad grid reference looks like. And then if you go further down, and these are higher and higher resolution as we go down the table, monads, and this is the standard botanical monitoring scale, or has been for many years, though now with increased access to apps and phones, GPS, we're able to record at a higher resolution than monad level. But a lot of the records pre-1990s were monad level records. And it could be 1 to 50,000 scale. So that's when you're getting into the Land Ranger maps from the Ordnance Survey maps, 1 in 50,000. So that means that 2 centimeters on the map would equal to 1 kilometer in real life. So that's the scale limit. And a monad is a 4-figure grid reference. So you've got TQ and then 4 digits after that. Then we can get a 6-digit grid reference, which is 100 meters by 100 meters. Okay, and that is equivalent to 1 hectare. And that is the size that is mapped on the Explorer maps from the Ordnance Survey maps, 1 in 25,000 scale. So that means that 4 centimeters on the map is 1 kilometer in real life. Okay, and that would be a good resolution to record most of your records at, because a lot of our GPSs on our phones and everything else like that could be reaching that resolution. You could use that, but it's still 100 by 100 meters. So if you have got a rare plant, for example, or something that's sensitive or interesting, you may want to go higher resolution. And of course, the guidance or the recommendation is always to try and record at the highest resolution you can, because there's no harm in doing it. Plants don't move. Animals is a different story, because if you've got a bird that's flying across, you can't quite define its exact position to a 10 by 10 meter square necessarily. But plants, you can get them down to exactly where they were. So there you go. So 10 by 10 meters would be an 8-figure grid reference. That looks like that. We'll come back to this table and it'll hopefully make more sense. If it's not already making sense, it will make more sense once I've gone through some more of the details of grid references. But before we get into some of the maths associated with reference, let's look at some history. Not everybody's into the maths. Some people are more interested in history. So history of recording locations. So botanical recording has a long history, goes back many, many centuries. And I think the father of recording is someone called John Ray, who was someone who was working at the University of Cambridge in the mid-1600s. And he was recording a lot of plants around Cambridge, and he produced this catalogue of plants growing around Cambridge here in 1660. And this is just a screenshot of that part of, well, not the actual 1660 version, but there was a translation that was undertaken in 2011. And what it did is it took the original catalogue here on the left, which was written in Latin, and it translated it into English and updated the species names and the descriptions and all that sort of thing, so that you could actually understand a bit better, or more, people who don't understand Latin and more general audience would be able to access that information that was in those books. So it was a really nice translation that was undertaken there. So you can see them side by side. But anyway, John Ray started recording, but at that time, he would use locations in terms of the proximity to landmarks. So of course, like our records, we're using a location. Unfortunately, back then there were no grid references. So it was just a descriptive term. Would have written maybe a sentence or two about where this plant was recorded. And as we've already seen, the problem with just having that as part of your record is that it's impossible to map really accurately or collate the information easily. Then, in about 1852, Watson went and divided Great Britain into 112 vice counties. So you may be aware of all the vice counties in Britain, and then the same thing was done by Robert Prager in, I think, 1901, and he divided Ireland into 40 Irish vice counties. Now, these vice counties are still used today, and we all are located in a particular vice county, and vice county recording is very much a feature of BSBI's recording structure. We have got vice county recorders for every single vice county in Britain and Ireland, and those will be individuals who will be monitoring all the records that are coming in from their county. They would usually be the experts on the plants in their county. They would maintain web pages and maybe also organize local flora group events and so forth. So that's the vice county system, and that was used for a long time in both Britain and Ireland to record the locations of plants. So you would have major county floras coming out of this system. And the reason it's still in operation today is because it's fixed. It doesn't change with political administration boundaries, which tend to be relatively changeable over time. So if you were to look at a vice county boundary, Hertfordshire, for example, if you look at the Hertfordshire administrative boundary today, it is quite different to what the vice county boundary would have been at that time. If you go to the BSBI website, there's a wonderful list of all the vice counties, and if you want to find out what's happening in your vice county, what the top plants or highlights plants or really exciting finds and sites are in your county, you can find all that on the BSBI website under local botany. So here's just some information or examples of records that were published in the Irish topographical botany using the vice county system. And this was published in 1901. And you can see some of these records with the place names, the counties over here, and then some information about the species. This is Drosera anglica, which is a sundew. great sundew, and this is just information about the locations and distribution of that plant across the different counties. So that's how recording happened back then. Then is when we introduced some grid references. So we moved from Vice County recording, sort of resolution in terms of records, to grid recording. And this happened about 1950s. We haven't lost Vice County recording, of course, because we still will be mapping things within the broader Vice County, and we have all our Vice County recorder systems. But now for the individual plant records, we can now really give a much better detailed georeference for those records in addition to the locality. So around the 1950s, we started using hectads, the 10 by 10 kilometer squares. And then about the 1980s, we started shifting to monads, which is the 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer squares. So we got a much higher precision of recording. And the grid references are derived from the Ordnance Survey National Grid Projection Maps. So there's a whole history of Ordnance Survey. Obviously, we were mapping areas of Great Britain for various reasons, mostly obviously to do with, I think, mapping issues with defence in the Kent coast and other things, and started up in Scotland due to various wars. But eventually it was obviously now an extremely useful mapping project, which gives us all these wonderful Ordnance Survey maps that we can access and have a look at and explore the countryside with, to extremely fine detail of every possible thing you could think of. So that happened in 1936 in Britain and 1952 in Ireland. So we have the two grid systems. They are slightly different, and we're going to have a look at those in a bit more detail now. Just a table here to summarize the two grid systems. We have 2 letters for the British grid and 1 letter for the Irish grid. And slight differences in terms of the key mapping units, but still Vice County, as we've said. So here we go. Here showing those 2 mapping systems, those 2 grid systems, the Irish grid on the left, and you can see there a single letter. There are 25 100 by 100 kilometer squares overlaid over the island of Ireland. And then in Britain, we have got 55 100 by 100 kilometer squares overlaying and resulting in the British grid. Now, if you were to go anywhere else in the world, the Irish or British grid would not be working. A lot of other places will use maybe their own grid system, depending on where they are located on the surface of the Earth. But a more universal system that you may have heard about is obviously latitudes and longitudes. But because the Earth is not flat, it's a sphere, there will be slight differences in the projection and all the rest in terms of calculating. And it's quite complicated to work out distances between 2 points when you've got latitude and longitude georeferences. And we're lucky in the UK and Ireland that we can use a grid system because it's metric distance of 100 kilometers between 2 points if they are measured in that resolution, for example. And then here on the right is just giving you an overview of why you've got these 2 letters for the British grid. You've got a larger area to cover, and we've got north, which tends to be these northern block of grids. And then we've got the southern block. And then in the east of England, we've got T. Don't know why it's T necessarily, but I suppose because the letters, how they're going in the alphabet, of course. And then O is somewhere off here somewhere, I think. No, actually, I like it's over here. There's OV and then there's something else there. Offshore, there's a tiny little bit of land that sticks out, I think, in the corner of OV. So if you happen to be there, that's the only one that starts with an O. Okay, so that's the broad big picture of the grid. So how do we zoom in to a higher resolution, higher precision, and move from those big squares, those 100 kilometer by 100 kilometers, because we can't map our plants at that level. We need to zoom in. So many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the Ordnance Survey maps, and I would assume that there are similar maps in Ireland from the Ordnance Survey in Ireland. as I said earlier, we've got the Explorer maps, which is 1 in 25,000, I think, and then the Land Ranger maps, 1 in 50,000 there. And then this is obviously what the OS maps look like. Now, there's a nice, this is when you're having a look at aerial photographs of places, you can spot sometimes some fun things going on from the air, of course. And in here, I'd like you to have just a notice of this little woodland, which is in a heart shape. And I'll tell you a bit of a story about that in a minute. But this is then just an example of a 1 by 1 kilometer square that's coming out of one of these ordnance maps. And the blue lines here is what is representing the 1 by 1 kilometer square. So that is, on the map, this would be 4 centimeters from that side to the square to represent the 1 kilometer if you were in the Explorer map. So if you're an orienteer, like me, then you would be using this to run around the countryside and find controls and things like that. Okay, so let's break it down and have a look at how you get to a higher resolution grid reference and how does this work when you're trying to map. Now, many of you will be like, thank goodness that we have these tools can work this out for us and we don't even have to think this through. If you're one of those, don't worry, there's no reason to necessarily understand the detail here, but I'm going to go through it for those who are interested in understanding if you don't already. So here's the British grid. These are those 100 by 100 kilometer grids represented by the 2 letters. I'm going to have a look at here in the southeast, the TL grid. That covers an area that includes Luton, Bury St Edmunds, so a huge area, 100 by 100 kilometers, of course. Now, each of these grids will be subdivided into, if I were to put another grid over it, so 10 lines, 10 horizontal lines and 10 vertical lines, I would divide this grid into 100 10 by 10 kilometer grids. Okay, so if I then zoomed into one of those 10 by 10 kilometer grids, that would then be a 2-digit grid reference, also known as the hectad, which we saw before, 10 by 10 kilometers. Now, if I took each of those 10 by 10 kilometer grids and I divided it again, 10 horizontal lines and 10 vertical lines, I would get 100 1 kilometer by 100 1 kilometer 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer grids. Okay, and those would be a 4-figure grid reference, and that's how you'd represent it. Okay, so in this image here, which I've taken from the Ordnance Survey website, incidentally, there is lots of useful guidance on the Ordnance Survey website to explain grid references, lots of nice videos as well. So this is not doing it for you. Go and have a look there. So there's 9 of these 1 by 1 kilometer squares represented in this diagram. And I'm focusing in on this one, which is called TL62. So you can see there's 62 into the bottom left corner of this square, and 33, which is there, 33. So this is 62. These are eastings, so along the corridor. So these are the horizontal lines, so the eastings, and the vertical lines are the northings. So along the corridor, up the stairs. I think there are other mnemonics. If anybody knows them, type them into the Q&A, and I can share them with you. I think there's other ways to remember it. Okay, and then that 1 by 1 kilometer square can again be subdivided into 100 100 meter by 100 meter squares. And that would then give you a higher resolution grid reference, a 6-figure grid reference. So in this case, if I'm talking about this little dark blue square here, I've divided my 1 kilometer square into 100 meter by 100 meter squares. And then this particular one would be at 5 and at 3. So that you can see that 6233 has now had a 5 added on to the easting and a 3 added on to the northing. So the 625 is the easting and the 333 is the northing. Okay. So if we were to look at that map I was showing you earlier, the Ordnance Survey map, and let's say we don't have a GPS or we don't have any other digital tool to calculate our grid reference for us, we should be able to, with this knowledge, then use the map to work out the grid reference for ourselves. And you can, of course, if this is something that you find easy to do and you've been in the field and you've gotten yourself a grid reference off a map, then you can input that directly into iRecord instead of asking iRecord to find it off the map for you. So that's obviously another way of doing it. So here we go. Here's our British grid. We then take that and you can subdivide it into the 10 by 10 kilometer grids, which gives us this one here, SU16. So there's 1 and 6, which is that one. And if I then take SU16 and I blow it up again, and I divide it up into 100 grids, then I'll get the 1 by 1 kilometer grid. So if I want to use that one, that would then be the 1, the first easting, and then 5 across, and then the 6 we had, and then the northings added 3. Okay, so you can see then that gets us to the monad. And then when you're looking at the Ordnance Survey maps, you have got your monads. The 1 by 1 kilometer grids are mapped using the blue lines. So you can always see what is a 1 by 1 kilometer area on those Ordnance Survey maps. And if you then were to overlay a grid onto that 1 by 1 kilometer square, divide it up into 100 squares, you would then be able to work out a much more precise grid reference, a 6-figure grid reference for a particular location on the map. So this heart-shaped wood that I was looking at earlier, if I wanted to give a grid reference for a plant that occurred maybe just on the south west edge of that heart-shaped woodland, I would then say, this is my 6-figure grid. I've gotten down to this SU 1563. So there's the 15, there's the 63 of my monad, and I count across, and I can see the bottom left corner of my grid is at 3. So there my 3 gets added onto the 15. And then if I go to my northings, I can see that the bottom left-hand corner is 5. Add on a 5. And there we go. I have my 6-figure grid reference for the hawthorn heartwood. So for those of you who don't know about hawthorn heartwood, that's what it looks like from the air. It's got a nice little story behind it. Let me just read it to you quickly. So this was actually planted in 1999, consists of 1,000 hawthorn trees, and it was planted as a memorial woodland by, what is this lady's name? Lady Keswick of Orr House. So quite a big estate, and it was in memory of her 2 brothers. So a lovely thing, and obviously in the spring when all the hawthorns are in flower, they're a pink variety. So beautiful picture that you'll see, and they're in a heart shape from the air. They're just looking back at the Ordnance Survey map, there you can see it is mapped as a heart. I thought that was nice. Okay, so hopefully with that explanation, you can now see there's the full summary again of the spatial recording units and how they are matched up to different maps, their size, and the terminology, and when we should use them. So I think in total summary, for your plant records on iRecord, a good resolution would be a 6-figure, but if you can get higher than a 6-figure, go for an 8-figure. It will depend on the accuracy of your device, but that will be measured by the software. And then when that record ends up in the database, we'll be able to work out what resolution was possible based on the device's software and other technical aspects of that record. Okay, so I suppose moral is to record 8-digit if you can. 10-digit I don't think will be very useful because none of our phones will be that accurate, I don't think. But 6-digit is good. Okay, so we've got a little bit of a question at the end here. I'm coming to the end of the talk. And I wanted to have a think, if you'd have a think about this one, and maybe perhaps come up with the answer. If, for example, you are recording a plant and you see that there is maybe the plant is in a whole woodland and there's actually quite a lot of them. It's not just one individual of that plant. Let's say you're in a woodland and you're seeing lots of wood anemone. And you would like to rather record the whole group of wood anemones in the wood and to do that, you could use a lower resolution for your grid reference. So you could get an 8-digit grid reference from your phone or whatever, but if you weren't able to use the map, what would the equivalent 6-figure grid reference look like? So do you want to have a look at those options? And let me know which one you think would be the correct 6-figure grid reference based on that 8-figure grid reference. So the first one has just removed, I think, the last 2 digits off the grid reference. Now, that a lot of people would think that would be the right way, but unfortunately, there you are removing 2 parts of the northing, and then you're making this 567 as the actual easting, and 848 is the northing, which is a totally different area. All you need to do if you want to reduce the resolution to 6-figure is you actually need to take the last easting, so you need to remove the 8, and the last northing, so you need to remove the 6. So this B would be the correct 6-figure grid reference. And then finally, I've got one last question. You may have noticed those meaty eyes when you look at all these letters, that the letter I has been left out of both the Irish and the British grid systems. Any thoughts about why? So it goes HJ, and then we look at HJ there. See, we don't have the equivalent down in the S's necessarily, but so the I is left out because I think when you're trying to write things down or record things, one and I easily confused. I think that's one big reason. Main reason that there's 25. You want to have a 5x5 grid. So these are 500-kilometer blocks. So 500 that way, 500 that way. And because there's 26 letters in the alphabet, you needed to lose one. And therefore, I was the one to lose. There we go. And then finally, just to finish off, lots of useful resources for finding grid references, learning about grid references if you want to. The 100 Plants web pages have got the demystifying grid references, which will support obviously this webinar. Ordnance survey maps have lots of information on the website. Obviously in Ireland, you can search and look at maps, get place names and grid references for the Irish grid. There's a nice website if you want to just get a grid reference for a site. Let's say you were out and about and you want a grid reference for a plant and you're now somewhere else. You grab a grid reference, is a nice website to go to, which will show you OS map and a aerial photograph next to each other. And then you can zoom in and zoom out and it'll give you all the grid references relevant to that particular location that you're choosing. And that is actually created by the Bedfordshire Natural History Society, but it covers the whole of Great Britain. There's something called Grid Reference Finder, so you can type in a postcode and it will find a grid reference for you. There's a nice website called Kukera, it's how to pronounce it, but this is only Great Britain, unfortunately, but it will show you all the squares. It will show you Google Earth OS maps, and it will show you the detailed vice county boundaries in Great Britain as well. Then there's Get an Irish Grid Reference, street maps, and Where's the Path. So lots of resources out there for you to find grid references if needed. And also, if, for example, you have a plant on iRecord and someone else has recorded this and they put in their grid reference, you want to go and find out where that is. And maybe it's in your local patch and you'd like to go and visit that locality and see if you can spot that plant. These are the resources you would use to find that grid reference off the iRecord record. Obviously, you can look at the map, which will help as well. And you can pop this into whatever resource you may have in the phone while you're out and about too. So lots of ways of finding it. And then there's a nice book that's been published, the Biological Recording Handbook, which is lots of useful information as well about recording too. And if you wanted to know which vice county you're in, go to the BSBI's local botany part of the website. And there's a tool there, which I'll just quickly show you, where you can simply click on and put in your postcode, and it will tell you what your vice county is. Okay, so you put in there, and that will give you all the resources associated with that vice county, including the key plants, rare plants that may be in that county, hotspots, very nice places to visit, all those wonderful, useful information. Okay, and I think that brings me to the end of the talk. And just to remind you, any general inquiries about the challenge, to email training@bsbi.org. And if you need some additional help after you've looked at the books or you've looked at the resources and potentially played a little bit with the auto ID options within iRecord, and you still not 200% sure and you'd like to get a double check on your ID, then we have the beginner plant ID at bsbi.org email address where you can email a photograph or 2 or 3 or whatever number that's needed and ask an expert to verify the identity of your species. Okay, so I am now going to have a look at the questions. I've got a few in the Q&A, so if you want to add any more in there as we go along, please feel free to. Thank you for listening. So let's have a look. Okay, so one is asking about entering a record into iRecord of a subspecies. So yes, so you have yellow archangel, you have the native yellow archangel, which is also grows in woodlands, Lamiastrum galeopdilon, and then you get some subspecies of Lamiastrum. So you also get a invasive one that I think has escaped from gardens. And one said that she couldn't find it in iRecord. So that's interesting. It's very easy to tell, as you said, the difference between them. So let's just have a look. If I were to go into iRecord and see if it doesn't find it for us. So if I type in species, and yes, string, oopsie. Okay, well, it's coming up for me as an option. There. So there should be options for you. I don't know if you're using the app or you're using online, but there is definitely the options to record it down to subspecies level if that is something you want to do. So if you have a go again and have a look, and if you still can't find it, send an email to training and we'll see if we can figure out why it's not appearing for you. Okay, Ketrin is asking, isn't it coincident that John Ray began plant recording in 1660? An island, ancient woodlands defined as an area that's been continuously wooded since 1660. This corresponds with the earliest detailed maps of Ireland related to Cromwellian land confiscations. Yep, that is interesting. That's interesting that Ireland is 1660 as a cutoff. I think in Britain, the cutoff for ancient woodland is, if I'm not mistaken, 1600. So it's very similar. So yes, lots of history, I'm sure, linked to all of that. And okay. Okay, so someone's asking that if they're recording other species in iRecord as well as plants, which of course that's what iRecord is for. You can record anything else your heart desires, butterflies, bees, and if you're using the app, and if you have not unselected the let's just show the app again. You haven't unselected the activity in the app. It may look to you like it's adding the record to the 100 plants challenge. So I would suggest that if you are recording other species, just to remember to click to not link to an activity and come back. But even if you don't, it's not the end of the world, because the way we've set up the activity, all that will show on the activity are plants. It won't show any butterflies or anything else within the activity. So there may be something going on within the coding for it, but this activity has been set to only show the plants. So don't be too concerned about it, but if you want to get it 100% accurate, just make sure that you're selecting the correct activity in the app. Or if you are recording in the website, that you are selecting the activity there. So if you look at all the records in the activity itself, it won't be plants. So, and don't worry, hopefully that'll be okay. Okay, Martin. 200 records in iRecord now. Wow, Martin, then you need to move on to the next phase. Right, so you feel that you didn't put enough detail in your locations. You've used the village name in the right and app to provide a detailed national grid reference. Well, the detailed grid reference from the app is perfectly fine. And if you use the village name and you put that in, that's all fine too. So don't worry, you don't have to go back and modify any. It all depends on where you're recording. So again, if you're in a village, then that's a clearly defined location, and that's very easy to find that. But if you're in the country lane in the middle of nowhere between villages, then you may need to add some more detail to your location. So all good. Someone's picked up what is Dinty. Yes, Dinty is linked to tetrad recording. So tetrads are 2 by 2 kilometer grids. And they have divided the, I think, 10-kilometer square into 5 or something, 5 by 5, different 25 different 2 by 2 kilometer squares, something like that. And they're given letter symbols DINTY, so it's called Dinty. So that's a tetrad level thing. So when you look at a tetrad grid reference, it looks different. You've got the 2 letters TQ, then you've got a number, and then you've got a letter. So it's called Dinty. Okay, so Catherine's uploaded a few plants on iRecorded. One has a small green tick on it. Just wonder what the tick signifies. Okay, so the tick is indicates that a verifier has looked at your record and agrees that you have identified it correctly. Now, there is 1 tick and there could be 2 ticks. There are other symbols as well. 2 ticks is where they say they are 100% sure and comfortable that they consider your identification perfect and there's no worries. 1 tick means that there may be a little bit of less surety in terms of whether they think it's 100% correct, but it's still just good enough because it will still go into the database. It may just be because they didn't have a photo or the photo wasn't clear enough to show the key features. There could be a variety of reasons, but it just means that they themselves cannot be 100% sure. So for example, if I'm a mammal recorder on iRecord for Hertfordshire, if someone submits a rabbit record for Hertfordshire, they don't provide a photo. Rabbits are very difficult to photograph, so you're not going to get very many records with photos. I would give them a 1 tick. I consider it correct because most people know how to identify rabbits. There's no problem. It's a common species, but I cannot be 100% sure they didn't confuse it with a hare, but I'm pretty sure on all likelihood it is a rabbit and it's all fine. So give it 1 tick. If they included a photograph, I would give it 2 ticks. So it's something like that. And plants will be slightly different. So 1 tick is great. Is it possible to edit a previously entered record in iRecord to provide more detailed habitat information? Yes, it definitely is. So if you want to go to your records in iRecord, you would need to go. You could do it in the app as well if your app records, if you submitted it via the app. But usually it's easiest to edit records on the website. So logging into iRecord, going to this page and looking at your records under Explore. So go to My Records. And then you go to your records. It'll show you all your records on an app. And then you go there, and then you would need to have a look at which record it was. So you would need to make sure you can use these little boxes at the top here to specify maybe a date that you know it was recorded or whatever may be the case. So obviously these are my records, so my name will come up under recorder. So you find the record that you would like to edit. Then on the right-hand side here, you'll see that there is a little edit symbol, a little pen and a paper. If you go in that, you can then edit the record to your heart's content. You can change whatever you want to change in terms of the information. You can add, you should be able to add habitat information as well. So you can select it from there. You can add additional details as you wish. So hopefully that answers your question, Catherine. Okay. Oh, no, that was Pete. Thanks for the question, Pete. Okay, and I think that is all the questions that have come through. And we've hit 8 o'clock exactly. So wonderful. Thank you, everybody. It was great seeing you. And hopefully we'll see you at the next webinar, which will be next week, Wednesday again. And that will be all about looking at some online resources for helping you to identify plants. This will be different to the webinar that was recorded a few weeks ago about toolkit. We'll be looking at particular types of ways and using a particular kind of online multi-access keys and stuff like that that could help you get to an ID, in addition to using your field guides. So hopefully we'll see you there. There are quite a few other webinars still to come, but hopefully enjoying the weather and getting out there and recording. And thank you very much for joining us.